the Mindset Athlete Podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. I'm a two-time Paralympian and owner of James Robert Fitness, which is an online training, nutrition, and mindset coaching business. And each week on the Mindset Athlete, we like to bring you inspirational athletes, a message, or experts talking about human optimization to teach you how to change your perception of your mindset and become 1% better. And on today's show, I've got Grant Parr. He's the author of the book, Next One Up Mindset, How to Prepare for the Unknown. He's also a keynote speaker and a mental performance coach. And also not forgetting the host of 90% Mental podcast. So welcome onto the show, Grant.
Hello. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So before we delve into today's episode, Grant, can you give a little bit of I would call it behind the scenes for my audience, something that you have not said to anybody else?
Man, that's a great question. We're jumping right into it, aren't we? I think something I've never talked about. I think through my story of adversity, what I had to deal with when I transitioned out of sport, it was very hard on my identity. It was very hard letting go. I was a little pissed off on when I left the game of football for many reasons, but and I found other things to kind of make me who I was at that time. But I think what people don't know, maybe they know a little bit, but I really used alcohol and drugs to really cope with the pain and escape. And it allowed me this unknown that happened to me at that time when I left football. I didn't know how to deal with the unknown or the unexpected except for medicate and kind of escape. And so I've scratched a little bit on that in my book in some interviews, but a lot of people really don't know the magnitude of what I was going through for about 2 decades. And those two things kind of, for better or for worse, helped me or consumed me.
But wouldn't you agree, Grant, that knowing what you know now, that notion of going towards drugs and alcohol is going to put you in a sense of numbness, really?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think that's where I wanted to go at the time. I had great people around me. I had a great support system, but your support system is only good if you actually reach out to them, if you share with them and be vulnerable. And I wasn't. And so there was a part of me, because I was frustrated and upset about what happened to me with my injury and just the pressures of the game. Being a quarterback is not easy. And I didn't want to be a quarterback anymore. I didn't want to be the All-American kid. I just did not want that anymore. But I didn't want that because I wasn't perfect anymore through my eyes. My body wasn't perfect. So if I can't play this game anymore, then who am I? And I spent years figuring out who I was, and I created a different person. I became a musician and did some other cool things, but still there was a lot of unfinished business. And it was due that I was just escaping and numbing myself out. But there was a part of me that I wanted to numb out a little bit.
But you talk about this unfinished business. Is it because, per se, you felt that the injury cut you short, kind of curtailed what you envisioned?
Yeah, I think so. But I think embracing that, embracing the fact that I'm done. And there's emotional work you have to do. Because if you don't take care of that emotional work, if you're frustrated and pissed off, then it's going to show up somewhere in your life, or it's going to show up later down in your life. So that unfinished business is just, I should have been more in the moment, should have been more self-aware of what's going on, and prepared myself. So, and because of that, because I had this unfinished business, I was so frustrated and pissed off for a long time. It put me in a position to look at life in a narrow way, meaning that I was living my life very narrowly. And I now in my life, it's all about playing a big game with everything, with my job, with my occupation, with my relationships. And so it didn't allow me to play a big game when I was younger in my life.
But in terms of, and this is probably where we will agree, Grant, in terms of focusing on the moment, focusing on the process, gratifying yourself for doing the little things right. Where I think this is where athletes probably do get, they're probably to a certain extent probably moving away from it a little bit nowadays, but not giving themselves the satisfaction to say, give yourself a high five, a pat on the back for doing the little things, because you perceive the process to be something that has to be done. It's not, in the eyes of an athlete, it's not a process. If I want to get from A to B, it just has to be done. That there's no ifs or buts. It's a sacrifice.
Yeah, it's like it needs to look a certain way, and if it doesn't look a certain way, it's really hard to actually, like you're saying, to appreciate and honor and celebrate these little successes. And I think when you think about it, when you think about the journey and the process, there's so many things that we can look at and find success. Right? It could be success. Success could be just showing up in the moment, getting into your breath. That's successful. Again, you and I talked about this. When you go, 0 for 12 in a game in basketball, on your 13th shot and you're vulnerable and you show up in that moment, is that success? Even if you make it or miss it? Yeah. So I know we all want to win. We all want to get promoted. We all want to advance in our life. But, when you look at the line of success or under the line of success, there's a list of failures, right? So we have to embrace these failures. And then we also have to embrace these little successes. So I think having a good relationship with with what success looks like and feels like and how you define it is important.
But do you think we're less inclined to look at failure in a positive light, be it from I'm going to say performance standpoint, because we're all right with failure in the sense of it being in a practice environment, because that's how you get better. But when it comes into the realms of, I'm going to say, reality, that's when the fear actually comes to a head, because it comes down to winning or losing. Obviously, practice to a certain extent. And you obviously argued that point when we discussed it before, in terms of you can't think like that, but you have a less negative view of failure in that environment.
Well, I think with failing or failure, for fear of failure, there's meaning to it, right? You said it. When you're practicing, it's okay to fail. Well, I think we need to be okay when we're competing, when we're on the stage. It's okay to fail. And I know that's scary, but what happens is that when we go into this performance, we get into the arena, we get into the basketball court, the swimming pool, whatever it is, the boardroom, we put meaning to it, right? So what's meaning to practice versus the competition? People can actually, there are different meanings. So when we put this meaning, when we get into the arena per se, and we compete, that's where there's some emotional charge on failure. And we need to start being more control to plug into the feedback of failure, not the emotional, because the emotional side, we're human and I want you to feel those emotions. But the quicker you can get out of the emotional state of failing, the faster you're going to move on. Because guess what? That failure that just happened, it's out of your control. You have no more control over it. So let's get the feedback from it and then let's move on. Let's let go. And it's a great process. It's hard to learn, but when you can do that in the moment, man, you're powerful.
But do you think, Grant, that you need to have, to some extent, need to have that disconnect between what is fear and failure and actually losing?
Yeah. So fears, you and I have talked about this. Fear, it's in the future. It's abstract. It's an illusion. And you create it, right? So, and I love this acronym, fear is false evidence appearing real, right? False evidence that you create. So when you think about the opposite of fear, it's faith. That's the true evidence. So faith is, and now I'm not talking about being religious. I'm saying just trust, faith. So when you have that faith, that's the true evidence. When you have fear, that's the false evidence. So when you actually look at fear versus the failure, well, you're going to fail. There's a list of failures. I want you to fail up. So when we're thinking about success, we're thinking about our promotion, we're thinking about things that we want to achieve. Well, we've got to go through this ladder of failures till we get there. So we have to embrace those failures. But fear, I think it's a choice, right? It's a choice. It's in the future. It's out of our control. Lean into it. If you have fear, lean into it. The faster you lean into it, I know it's scary, the faster that fear goes away.
I think that's a great anecdote, that, in terms of looking at it from that perspective. And do you think because it has that negative attachment towards what in a sense is, okay, on the one hand, faith, optimism, hope is viewed as very successful, right, and on the other hand, people will look at fear as losing, missing out. You can use any amount of wording to exemplify what I'm saying, but they kind of put a guard up from that basis of, I'm going to put up a picket fence, and everything from a successful standpoint is going to be on my left hand side, and everything to do with fear is going to be on my right hand side.
Right. Well, I think too, it's like the fear of looking good versus the fear of looking bad. It's a crazy paradigm, but I think when you have things like social media, right? Media itself, but social media, I mean, you can get exposed real quick. So when you're talking about an athlete, and even a musician, an actor, if you fail, right, there's this fear that it will get pushed out in seconds, right? And then people start creating this image of you just because of your failure. So in that regard, can you control that? You can't control social media. You can't control what people say. That's why we need to get right with ourselves, and we need to get the feedback from failure and not get so connected to the emotional charge of it.
And do you think because people and to a certain extent get a kick out of other people's failures, they get validation for themselves then?
That's a great question. I think there's some unhappiness, when people have to, they get some kind of validation or they get some charge out of it for exploiting someone's failures or making them feel bad. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm here, I'm playing a different game. I want to be surrounded by people that are going to pick me up, people that are going to be honest with me, give me great feedback, but not surrounding myself with people that get a charge and they validate their existence because they make me feel like crap. I mean, I can weed those people out pretty quick. I can read that energy as well. But I try to stay away from those type of people.
But from a sporting sense, and this is probably where the general populace see that, I won't say a disconnect, but because per se they've not been in that elite status environments, and I'm not holding that against them, but I think they perceive as athletes are very cutthroat in terms of they operate like that 24/7, where in the reality that's probably not true or very far from it.
Right. Yeah, there's so many perceptions and assumptions what people think what elite athletes are and how they behave and what they feel like. I just had a conversation. I was on a radio show yesterday, and they were talking about, when you're working with an elite athlete, these elite athletes have everything. They have the money and they have the sponsors and they have, people around them supporting them in every way. Doesn't it just seem like that everything is, that they're great, like their lives are happy? And I said, just because they have all that, you have to understand when you're elite, right, there's more pressure to stay elite. There's more things that you deal with. It's like when you make more money, there's literally more things you have to think about when you make more money. So when you have more status, there's just more things you have to deal with. And so I think as an elite athlete, you have to really dial yourself in with routines, understand your belief systems, know who you are at all times. Because if you're elite and you have status, you have more exposure, people are they're gonna try to find something to exploit. They're gonna try to see if they can make you weak. There's just, I don't want to say that's what our society is, but there are people out there that do that.
But you would also agree, Grant, that an athlete is a mindset. It's very much towards preparation. What's the other two? Execution, and I can't remember what the last one is. But in terms of that, whereas I think people have that disconnect, the athlete is per se good at that craft. Because I can't do that, I can't relate.
So you're saying, like, as far as like the audience, the fans, like
They are one in this themselves. That everybody it can be an athlete, because it's at the end of the day it's how you talked about perception of things. The difference is probably the person that strives towards success has been better at actioning those actual endeavors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those people that have success and are achieving success. They have discipline, right? They have purpose, their intention. You talked about mindset, right? Being an athlete, you have to, it's a mindset. Well, it is for sure. And also when you think of mindset, which is a word we use all the time in society now, I believe that mindset equals intention. You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I've never seen someone that has a particular mindset, whether it's aggressive or calm, right? And they're not intentional. You can see when someone's really calm during a chaotic situation, they are being intentional. Like Kawhi Leonard, look at the way he plays basketball. I mean, he's playing against the elite players of the elite players. He's playing against the Warriors and all these other teams that are great. But he is he's being so intentional with his composure and his poise, right? And there's some people that don't have that control. But that's just one way. When you think about a mindset, it's intention. And I think it's important that when we go into practice, we go into work, we go into competition, that we set our intention and we connect with it with our breath and understand what our intention looks like and feels like.
But would you not agree that his demeanor, character, and to a certain extent personality is derived from that, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think some people have, they have a perception of Kawhi Leonard, he's reserved. He doesn't really share his thoughts. And when he does, maybe he's not as articulate or he's not enthusiastic. But, you can slice and dice that all day long. But as a player, as a performer, I think he's pretty consistent on the way he wants to be as a basketball player. He's pretty intentional. He's consistent.
Yeah, but history has taught us that you've got to be wary of the quiet ones.
Right. Yeah, you never know. I mean, that's a good point.
But in terms of that actual thought process, in terms of how you carry it yourself, how can, per se, somebody, in your opinion, change some of those things? Because I know I've got frustrated in the past, be it with teammates. I think the one that I really got a grip to is probably talking badly about myself in a training environment. That's kind of gone out the window. But how do you, per se, get not necessarily your clients or people that you work with to change that? Be it outside of the easy ones would be probably meditation and things like that. But what would be some other useful tools that people could implement
when they're in the moment of being frustrated?
I would say so.
Yeah. I think when you're competing in any sport, again, team or individual sport, I think the hardest thing to do is when you're in that moment where you're experiencing failures or you're not hitting your own expectation, things are just not jiving, right? It's the hardest thing to shift back into your most confident self in that moment. That's why plugging into feedback versus the emotion is really important. It's the hardest thing to do, I think. And once an athlete can learn a process to get them from a frustrated state into a more positive state, they're in control. They're bulletproof. They're going to outlast people around them and their opponent. Now, how do you do that? What's that process? Well, to be honest with you, it's all about the here and now. If you want to change any kind of behavior, you have to be self-aware and you have to drop into your breath. Get into your breath. Start getting that relationship with your breath. Now, there's tons of different ways of getting out of that frustrated state into a confident state. But for me, I like the BVT model, which I created. It's breathe, visualize, and talk, self-talk. So you're breathing, getting yourself in the moment. You're visualizing what you need to do or what you need to recorrect, and then talk yourself back into your confidence. So when we think about confidence, it is a feeling, but you know what? And I'm not going to deny that, but confidence is not just feeling. It's acting. You have to act into your confidence. So what are those actions, what they look like? It's breathing, it's body posture, right? And it's also the way you talk to yourself. If you can do those three things, you can act yourself into confidence.
But what would you do from the other perspective? Because we talked about this with probably to a certain extent, I'm going to coin it overconfidence, be it you talked about the analogy of a soccer team that you work with. We have a given right because we think we are that good. We are going to be in a championship later down the line. How do you get people to switch on? You talked about the notion of you have to treat every game the same. You can't just step up to the next level and try and go through the motions kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's a good question. It's a great topic to talk about because when you think about like being overconfident, I call it cockiness, right? So there's that line of cockiness and confidence. What's the difference? And the way that I look at it is cockiness is about them and confidence is about me. So, and if I can kind of go in deeper on that, when someone's trying to be cocky, they're trying to please the external. They're trying to take away the energy or the direction of someone or something, and they're putting on themselves so they can please something outside of them, right? And sometimes they do that very negatively, and the energy, is not positive. Confidence, even if it sounds like you're being a little bit cocky, if you as the individual know that your intention is being confident, it's not about then you shouldn't care what people think anyways, right? Because it's none of your business to think of, to worry about what people think about you because you can't control it. But I think about the confidence is about you. It's intrinsic. And if your intention's in place, I'm staying in my lane, man. I'm confident. I'm going to go do what I'm going to do. And I'm going to feel great about it. So I think there's a difference of cockiness and confidence. Cockiness is about them. Confidence is about you.
But if you put, Grant, those on a spectrum, where would you put, oh God, I can't, the word just eluded me then, arrogance in terms of that, because it's different. Most people will associate obviously that very negatively.
Yeah. I mean, I think arrogance is kind of in the family of being cocky or in cockiness, right? What about when we think about the word swaggered? Like, someone has swag, the way they walk, right? Is that being cocky or is that being confident, right? And again, it's meaning. What meaning do you want to put on it? And again, if I'm the way that I'm walking, this swagger that I have, and I have great self-talk, I'm in my breath and I'm feeling great, I'm visualizing what I'm going to do, but someone deems that I'm cocky, well, guess what? You have a choice. You can either plug into their perception and get yourself out of focus, or you can just stay in your lane and have that swagger and have that confidence and have it be authentic and be intentional, right? So it's a good question because I think arrogance is kind of in the family of being cocky.
And I think, per se, the argument, Grant, I think is a good one from the realms of the athlete, because it does come on two sides of the fence. It'd be how you perceive yourself and how you are being perceived by, be it teammates, fans, media. Yeah. They're all going to have their opinions, be it because they're not inside your head. But I think that is, and I did a Facebook Live months ago on it, be it talking about what is the difference between confidence and arrogance. And I probably didn't do the best way in terms of explaining how I was talking about it, but you explaining how you would put it, I get that perception, because I was trying to say, well, and that's the argument I will use, confidence is good, and having that arrogance, it is that perception of somebody else. It is. There's nothing wrong with it per se, because it is in the eye of the beholder. It is very much down to how it is interpreted by the individual. You can't change that, no, how hard you try. I know family did say to me, well, because somebody said our arrogance is unacceptable. It's like, but I wanted to change their opinion of it. It's like, right. Well, I think he's very old school in the way he operates, the gentleman that commented towards it. So it's like, well, you're old school. It doesn't matter what I say. I'm not going to change your mind. And my family was saying it from that point of view. You're not, he's not stuck in his ways, because that's probably too harsh, but he's got the right to his opinion, and you can't change it. You could probably tell your side of the argument, which I did with the video. Right. That's where it should stop.
Well, when you think about, because you're kind of bringing some light to the word arrogance, right? Because you hear that word and you think it is negative, and it can be negative. But I think, when you think about cockiness and confidence, when you think about being confident, you're in control, you're authentic, and you're intentional, and it's all about you. It's intrinsic. Now, when you're cockiness, as soon as you become cocky, you just took yourself out of focus, and you're actually pointing your direction, your thoughts, and your emotions to the external. So you're not actually focused on what's in your control. You are trying to appease something outside of you. So you just took yourself out of focus being cocky, right? Arrogance, I think that you can still be intrinsic and intentional and confident, and be a little bit arrogant. Just as long as it doesn't get you out of the focus, right? Because I think cockiness gets you out of focus.
But what sport would you say would exemplify that? Would you say American football is very, from the outside periphery of it, is very much about the showmanship? It does border between what is cockiness and what is arrogance, by be it the stoppages in play, like first downs, sacks and things like that. It's very much, okay, they've tried to clamp it down in terms of, oh gosh, they put a rule in for the Miami Hurricanes in terms of, so they couldn't over celebrate, be it their successes. But do you think that's one of the sports that exemplifies those extremes?
I think it is. I mean, there's a fair amount of sports that do that. I think so. I think basketball too. I mean, when you think about, this is a general statement. We all love Steph Curry. He's brought a cool dynamic to the game, right? However, he is humbled. He does a lot of he works his routine. He commits himself physically, mentally. But there's a little bit of arrogance to him at times, right? When he's chewing on his mouthpiece, and he's smiling after he makes, 5 in a row. Or when he sits there and he does some kind of shaking, dancing. I mean, that could be, even though he's having fun, right? But that could be deemed as a little bit arrogant, right? But he's actually entertaining too. That's his job, right? Is to entertain. Now, you brought up University of Miami, which is funny. They brought something back where the defensive player, and if I can remember that right, if I'm explaining this right, that if you do something right, whether if it's an interception, a sack, or something great, you get to wear this chain, like a really, really massive gold. I think it's a chain. I don't think it's a belt, but it's a chain. And that, why do you need to do that? Like, why could you just own that you just did a great thing on defense, but you have to show the whole world on the sideline that you're wearing this. It's a thick, thick chain. It's massive. But I understand that that's incentive. It gets people pumped up, but that could be arrogant as well.
But then you could even go a step further, like Grant. That's an external motivator as well. It's very much, to a certain extent, materialistic as well. Oh, there's an incentive to go beyond what I would say the intrinsic one, what every athlete, I won't say aspires to, but it's built into their core DNA, is that passion for the sport. They love what they do. That's where I think people were outside that bubble, they lose sight of that. It's like, well, why do you do that? Well, I've never lost the initial drive that I got when I was a kid.
Mm. Well, you brought up motivation. It is motivation, and it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but again, it could be deemed as arrogant and cocky and whatever. But you brought up the word motivation. There is 2 different types of motivation. There's intrinsic, extrinsic. So people are going to get motivated and be incentivized by wearing a gold chain, getting a scholarship, getting a sponsor, having a girlfriend like them even more because they're a better basketball player that day. Whatever it is, that's external. That's okay. But if you're 100% extrinsically motivated and you don't hit those things, those milestones, then that's where things can happen, negative things. You start giving up on the sport, get self-doubt, start questioning if you're even good enough. And then if you do that long enough, you end up quitting. So that's why I teach athletes to get really intrinsic with themselves. What's intrinsically motivating you right now? And when I like a balance of 60-40. So 60% of my motivation is going to be intrinsic and 40% of it's going to be external or extrinsic.
Why specifically that split?
I just feel that it could be 50-50. I think it could be anything you want it to be. It just you have to have a good understanding of what you're being motivated by. But I think anytime that you're more intrinsically motivated, you're in more control, right? The extrinsic or external motivations, it's out of your control. So I think the more that we can focus intrinsically, we're just in more control. So that's why I do the 60-40.
And then Grant, in terms of, I'm going to be a little bit negative now in terms of the questioning, but from an awareness point of view, where does the athlete need to become more aware when it the motivation starts skewing towards the other way?
So when does he need to be more aware?
Well, I would say so it doesn't become out of those extremes of losing passion towards the sport that they love, and then eventually, okay, the worst scenario possible is obviously quitting.
Right. Well, there's a lot of factors involved. I think you got to truly know who you are, and what you do as far as playing basketball, football, even when you're a salesperson, an actor, that's what you do. It's not who you are. And that's huge. And so a lot of times we're motivated internally or externally, and we have to still know with our motivation, who are we outside of our performance? So when we're connected to this extrinsic motivator, right? We want to get that scholarship. Okay. I don't get the scholarship. That means what? I'm not good. I'm not good enough. And then then maybe you have another game that's not that great. So you have 2 games that are not good. And then you start really going, all because you're focusing on this external thing that's out of your control. And your identity gets really connected with it, right? And so that's why it's really important when we talk about the warrior mindset, right? We need to learn who are we outside of our game as a person. And then how do we ignite this warrior mindset and connect our motivation with it when we get into our environment? And then how do we let go or transition out of that warrior mindset and get back to who we are?
But then is it not more exemplified by what is society and sport nowadays? It's very one-dimensional. It's one sport-centric. I'm all about getting to the next, I'll call it the next level, because it could be getting from high school to college, from Pee Wee football to high school, and it's very goal driven. Okay, it's obviously the end goal is very materialistic because they want to go to the professional ranks. But in terms of, is that the root cause of what's causing the problem in the first place?
I think it's one of them. I think it's hard to probably pinpoint the root. I mean, you can probably pinpoint a root, but I would say specialization is, from my perspective, it is kind of a problem right now with sports for many reasons. And again, I'm not saying that my upbringing was the right way, but I'm really blessed that I got to play baseball, soccer, basketball, football, track. Like I got to play all those sports. And obviously I got to a point where my love was more towards football. So I started to taper down my sport. So as I got into my craft as a football player, I was only playing literally baseball or football. And then I just ended up letting go baseball. But I had an opportunity to learn different things throughout my development, different rules, different teams, different approaches. My body had to do different things in each sport. Now, and I felt that it gave me, I was more of a well-rounded athlete because of that. Now, I'm not saying that you can't be a well-rounded athlete within your sport, but when you think about like how many games a professional baseball team goes through. They go, 100 and something games. That's a lot, right? Well, there are summer leagues for 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And just in the summer, in 3 months, they're playing 60-something games. That's just in a summer, let alone they're going back to their club team, their high school team, right? And they're playing a ton of. So I think when we're pushing this specialization, it's just excessive. And I think it's hurting the development of their bodies. And it actually, I think it's increasing burnout.
But also, would it not exemplify, the late bloomers as well? Because they're going to be, they're more likely to have that essence of self-doubt because what was naturally their progressional curve in the past would be all right because eventually it would be discovered. But now because of this nature of being specialization, it's being superseded and making it worse.
Right. So are you thinking to understand your question, is it when you have athletes that are late bloomers, meaning that they started the sport later and they didn't start it so young where they had all that time to understand, to get better at the sport?
Not necessarily that way. You could be the late bloomers, from you could put it from that argument per se, but then normally you would associate the late bloomers, they haven't fully developed in that sport or been discovered. They've kind of come into it at a later stage, and come out of nowhere. In terms of a psychological standpoint, are they more likely to put themselves and dampen their actual confidence because of that? Because it's been what was the gap being to say, I won't put a percentage on it, but seeming smaller when there was more sports relatively available, as opposed to now people are focusing on one. The gap is perceived as even greater.
Got it. Well, I think when you regardless if you're a late bloomer or not, but you've actually specialized in a sport, and that's it, right? You're a baseball player. You've been playing baseball since you were 6 years old, and now you're 20, and all you've done is play baseball. Now, sure, there's a lot of things that come up like injuries, burnout, and all that, but your identity, like that's the only thing you've done your whole life. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but you have to have some good people around you. You have to have some good emotional intelligence to transition, because there's going to be a transition out of that specialization. But as you're talking, I want to share a cool story, and it's one of my best friends who played in professional ranks. He was a pitcher for the Anaheim Angels. And so he went through that whole process, but he didn't specialize. He played football with me. He played baseball. He played soccer, and he played other sports. But his son pretty much specialized in baseball, played baseball pretty much his whole career, and was good. Was a good baseball player. Now, his senior year, he was a backup first baseman. So he didn't play that much. But his senior year, he was 6'5", pretty tall, still trying to develop his body. But there was an opportunity to pitch. So they moved him in with like a month and a half left of his senior year to pitch. And he just started blowing it up. Like it was like all the scouts, all the professional scouts, all the college scouts, they were like, who is this guy that's 6'5"? He's like, he just started to learn how to pitch. So when you think about that, right, his life changed. Like 1 year later, he went to the best junior college in the country, got some coaching, great coaching, and he got drafted to the Philadelphia Phillies in the 5th round, right? But he specialized. He specialized his whole life. He was a backup. His confidence, he still had great confidence. So, I mean, you can look at it from different views, different angles. Obviously, that's kind of a storybook story. But and guess what? He was 6'5" when he got discovered. It's been a little over a year, and he is almost 6'7". So, and they said he can probably grow another inch or two. So, I mean, it's a feel-good story, but still, like specialization, we've got to be we got to put our pulse on it a little bit better. We have to make sure that we're managing that whole process a little better, and encouraging people to, if they have the ability and they have the energy and the inspiration to do other sports, why not?
My penultimate question to you, Grant, is, and I think we have to a certain extent answered this question, but I will ask it anyway. If you had to challenge or change somebody's inner belief system, how would you do it?
Challenge or change?
Yep.
Well, I would, depending on the situation, I mean, go back to the beginning. Like, how was this belief system created? That's the best way for me as a coach or a practitioner to understand what that belief, where it was created, how it was created, how long have you had this belief system? And because I need to understand the relationship you have, because I've had a belief system almost all my life. And I'll be vulnerable right now on your show. It took me until a couple of years ago to completely let go of this belief system and be okay with it. But I felt like I was never smart enough. And when you think about all the things I've done in my life, I mean, being a quarterback, you have to be pretty smart, right? To get the amount of promotions I got in the workplace, you got to be pretty smart. And I just never thought I was smart enough. And that belief system came up all the time. And then now I'm just done with it. Like, I am smart enough. Yeah, there's moments where someone's smarter than me, or maybe I didn't say the right thing or didn't come out right, but doesn't mean I'm not smart. So I think just going back to the creation of that belief system and in tackling, putting a plan to actually change that belief system.
And my final question to you before we wrap up the episode, if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about today into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Oh, man. I love this question. Man, we've talked about a lot of things, but I, you know, what I do want to say, and I say this a lot, is whether if we covered this or not in the podcast, be vulnerable, be in the moment, right? Because our moments turn into memories. The more that we're present, the more we're in our breath, we're creating these moments to be more memorable memories. And so, or positive memories. So play a big game. Don't play a narrow game like I did for a long time, and start getting that relationship to that breath. And if you can take away that BVT, breathe, visualization, and self-talk, man, that's awesome.
So once again, Grant, thanks again for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
Awesome. I mean, I enjoyed it. I have fun.
Oh, the pleasure's been all mine. If you like this episode, please do share it with your friends, and do let Grant and I know what you thought of the episode by tagging us over on Instagram at GFP Mindset and at James O. Roberts 11. And again, you can do the same on Twitter and Facebook. And finally, do check out his book, The Next One Up Mindset, How to Prepare for the Unknown. And not forgetting his podcast, 90% Mental. And once again, do check out my free content at fitamputee.co.uk/free-resources. Make sure to check those out. The links will be in the description. You can find all the show notes at mindsetgame.lipson.com under the category Psychology. So once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast.